Elvin asked me a few weeks ago to recap Ecclesiastes, and I told him, "You've already preached that. That sounds kind of meaningless to me." That's an Ecclesiastes joke. Okay, all right. It'll get better, trust me. My name's Matthew Lauritsen, like he said. I have a wife, Allie, and a daughter, Stella. She's 9 months old, and I'm a teacher at Bellevue West High School. I teach math, and a couple times a year I get to substitute teach a little bit for Elvin. So I appreciate that opportunity, and I thank the elders for allowing me to do that. We have arrived at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes. Our series has been called Life Under the Sun. And I wouldn't say it's been like fun to work our way through it. It's a really dark book, and it's kind of a reality check book. But it's been good. So I want to do a couple things today. I want to review what we've learned and provide some kind of application ideas. Then I want to read the conclusion of Ecclesiastes, Solomon's message. And then I want to reflect on how Jesus kind of plays into all of that. So take out your bulletin if you have one, and turn to the back. We're going to have a quiz to start. I do this for a living, give quizzes and stuff, so get it out to the back. I wrote down 5 statements underneath the review and application part. So right underneath review and application, I have 5 statements that either Solomon makes directly in the text, or that Elvin mentioned as he preached through the book. So I want to give you about 30 seconds or so. Eyes are on your own paper. See if you can write through all of the blanks. If you're a guest, you're probably going to have to cheat off somebody or something. But see how you do. Take 30 seconds and fill in those blanks. There are no prizes. Yes, it will. Yes, it will. Cannot use notes. There is not a word bank. There is a retake. You're just going to have to watch the videos over. Yeah? Jeez. Let's go over the answer, see how we did. How about that? So number 1, for all is vanity and a striving after wind. Number 2, if you can't find it under the sun, look above the sun. Good. Solomon, been there, done that. Good. Build it backwards, live it forwards. And lastly, don't let good things become God things. So these were kind of some key ideas I thought from our series, and I wanted to provide some application ideas. The message is kind of flipped this morning. I'm going to go over application type things at the beginning, and then at the end we'll kind of talk about the conclusion and the title of the sermon and stuff like that. But number 1, the first passage, or the first blanks were, for all is vanity, a striving after wind. Solomon makes this statement time after time in the book, and it's like vapor. Life is like vapor. You just can't grab it. You can't hold on to it. It's there 1 second and not the next. Has anybody ever tried to catch the wind? Really? I'm talking literally. Do you ever see anyone outside running around, going like this, running as fast as they can? You might have when you were little, absolutely. But from an adult's perspective, that's like, really? And if you do that as an adult, you're weird, or you need help. But I think we're kind of like this, where God says your pursuits, the things that you're really putting your life into, it's just like chasing after a wind, man. It's just not going to do it. And it's so easy to do this because there's so many things that we have in our ears and in front of us. But as God's people, let's not do that. My idea is that you write a purpose statement for yourself. A mission statement, or if you want to call it that. New City has one. It's to help people know, love, and follow Jesus. So we talk about it a lot. It kind of guides where we as a church family are going and helps us make decisions. But maybe you do this as an individual or as a couple or as a family. You sit down a couple times. You have the Bible open. You just jot some things down about, why am I living in Bellevue or Papillion or whatever, Nebraska right now? This mission statement might not last forever, and it's not going to make you a holier person just by having one. But maybe if you have something written down that you have kind of on your mind more, it might help us live life with a direction and more of a purpose instead of chasing after the next shiny thing that comes our way. So just an idea, maybe a purpose statement, because we were talking about purpose a lot in Ecclesiastes. Number 2, we wrote, if you can't find it under the sun, you look above the sun. It's a great line, Elvin. That was a really good one. How often are we intentionally looking above the sun? I mean, there's so much stuff under the sun. You think about our culture, where we live right now. It's just busy with stuff. And I think Stella illustrated this point to me these last couple weeks. She's in the phase where she'll get into drawers and just start tossing stuff, and then she'll go to something else and toss that on the floor, and then she'll put this in her mouth and then go to the next thing. And it's fun to watch her do that. There's nothing bad about it. That's normal. But my favorite times with Stella are when I'm hiding behind a corner and she crawls and she kind of sees me, and then she'll peek around and I'll peek around. It's gooey stuff and she'll smile, and it's kind of oh man, that's the best. I like looking at her play with a bunch of stuff, but it's the best when she peeks around the corner and sees me and smiles. And I think that's kind of what I wanted to illustrate here, is that I think God's the same way. We have a bunch of stuff going on in our lives that might not be bad, but I think God's favorite times are when we're not in the drawer doing a bunch of stuff, but we take minutes every day and just look up and peek around the corner, open our Bibles, and look in God's face. I mean, it's so necessary for us to get daily, intentional time where our Bibles are open and nothing else is around, and it's just prayer, it's just you and God. And if we don't intentionally set this aside, we're just going to be a casualty of this rat race that we probably see a lot of our friends in. So set aside the time to look above the sun. It just doesn't happen. Number 3, Solomon could say he's been there, done that. And Elvin preached through the first couple chapters of the book, and we basically decided that Solomon could be understood as the president, the Pope, Bill Gates, and Hugh Hefner with all that he had in his life. He had everything. He tried everything. He had the leadership. He had the power. He had the great projects. All the pleasures a man could desire, and he gets to the end, and then he says, vanity. Just couldn't grab it. Futile. I think we should be intentional about asking other people who have been there and done that. And I think this would be a great idea for people you know in your city group or friends that you know within our church family. You find someone that's in the next stage of life, or maybe 2 stages down the road. You say, hey, can we get dinner sometime? Or can we get lunch after church? And you just ask them a bunch of questions. And listen. That's it. Just to hear from somebody who has been there and done that, and just be a learner. So think of someone, set it up if that's something that interests you. Number 4 was build it backwards, live it forwards. Another great line. Did you come up with that yourself, Alvin? I don't think so. Yeah, that's what good preachers do is they steal. No, I didn't. I wasn't here for the catechism thing last week either. So, but he was talking about Solomon in chapter 7, and he's talking about life wisdom, meaning that you live your life in view of being on your deathbed. And he talked about dealing with things like patience and anger, surrounding yourself with people that spur you on towards Christ. And so just thinking about how we're doing with those things, patience, anger, surrounding ourselves. Maybe there's something there that you can intentionally do to work on those things. And lastly, don't let good things become God things. I mean, so easy to say, but my goodness, it's so easy for those good things just to start consuming our mind, and it's what we think about when we wake up. It's what we think about when we're going to bed. It's any resting thought kind of ends there. And an idea I have, I'd like to issue a challenge to think about prayerfully considering fasting from certain good things for a period of time. I mean, I don't know what it is for you, whether it's food or dessert or the news or coffee or Instagram or television or Snapchat, certain reading material. None of those are bad things. But I think sometimes you just got to come to a point where you say, no, that's just a good thing. I don't need to do it for a week or a month or a year or a day or whatever. You just need to put good things in their place, because they so easily become God things. And when they get to that level, it's just foolish and offensive to God to have those kind of things consume our minds. Just to have a week or whatever. I did it with Dr. Pepper this week. And there were days I was craving all of the 23 flavors. It was tough. And it sounds silly. But there were just times when you say, you know what? God, no, I don't need a Dr. Pepper. I have you, Lord, and I can think about you and focus on you in this time. So consider a fast from a good thing, just to make sure you're telling it, no, you are just a good thing. You are not a God thing. My best thoughts are going to be above. And so, and just a quick word, if we're talking about application, do it. The Bible says it's deceiving, we're tricking ourselves if we hear a good idea and don't actually do it. The Bible says that's being tricked. We're tricking ourselves into thinking that we're growing in godliness when, no, we just heard something good that we liked. So just a word of warning. I wouldn't try to do all those things, but maybe pick one and do it. So now, let's shift gears to see how Solomon ends his sermon to kind of finish up. And if you have your Bibles, you can crack them open to chapter 12. That's the last chapter. The Pew Bible in front of you, it's going to be page 559. So I'll give you a chance to get there. We're going to be in chapter 12. Solomon's closing down his message. The book of Ecclesiastes is called Solomon the Preacher. And the preacher's ending his sermon. And we're going to close with Solomon's final conclusions in verses 1 through 8. After verse 8, it's kind of like an ending of the book where the author refers back to Solomon in third person. And those are good verses too, I'm not saying that, but we're just finishing up where Solomon is talking in first person. He's finishing his sermon or his message. So any notes can go under that heading where we're talking about the preacher's conclusion. Chapter 12, this is verse 1. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. It's like he says, okay, kid, you got to get this while you're young. When you can still go. Remember God. He's the one that created you. He wired you. Don't treat him like a teenager treats their parents and say they don't know anything. Don't treat God like that. Remember God when you're young, because days are coming when it's just going to be rough towards the end. Verse 2, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain. He says, listen, figure this out before. He uses that word before again. Remember this before the days get dim, before the circle of life is ready to reset. That's what chapter 1 was all about. A generation comes, a generation goes. The sun rises, the sun sets. Figure this out while we're young. And in the next few verses, verses 3 through 7, the commentators generally agree that he's going to poetically illustrate that our bodies are going to break down. Kind of like an old beater car. And you can change the oil, you can fix it up nice, but when that mileage ticks up over 100,000, things just start breaking down. I have a 2002 Honda CR-V. My wife drove it in high school. It's a great car. But when I go through the drive-thru, I have to open the door because the window won't roll down anymore to get the food. I have to wear a watch because the clock doesn't work. I have to avoid any bumps because it makes really weird noises when I do that in the rear. It breaks down. And our bodies are like a 2002 Honda CR-V. I'm sorry. They had their glory days when Allie was driving them in high school, but eventually it breaks down. This is how he puts it. He's speaking poetically here. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men are bent. Solomon says, the strong men, your legs, they're going to be bent. You're going to be hunched over. We're going to be really hunched over. We already hunched over looking at our screen all the time. When we're old, it's just going to be like permanent. And the grinders cease because they are few. He's talking about your teeth. Stella doesn't have teeth and I have to feed her right now. Someday it's going to be the opposite. Stella's going to have to feed me. I hope I don't wear the bib thing. I'm going to have better aim at getting things in my mouth when I'm old. But she's going to have to feed me. My teeth are going to stop working. And those who look through the windows are dimmed. Our eyes. We're going to have to be squinting. We're going to have to do that thing with the glasses where you look above it, look below it. Is that bifocals? Is that what that is? It sounds terrible, by the way. But our eyes are going to go bad. Verse 4, and the doors on the street are shut when the sound of the grinding is low. You can't hear very well. And one rises up at the sound of the bird. We're not going to be able to sleep as well. Now, I've heard through an anonymous source within our church family that you have to wake up to pee a lot when you're old. You rise up. Now, I won't name the person, okay? But I appreciate that wisdom, Steve. That was good. And all the daughters of song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high. I'm in verse 5. And terrors are in the way. When we're old, we're not going to get in line in a roller coaster. We're not going to want to get up on ladders. He continues, the almond tree blossoms, white hair. The grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails. If you read this in the original language to like grasp the metaphor that he's using here when he talks about desire. It's like, I'll say, Solomon would understand why there's so many commercials for Cialis on television. I'll just leave it at that, and we'll keep going. Because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Verse 6, figure this out, before the silver cord is snapped, probably a spinal cord, or the golden bowl is broken, not the restaurant, probably the skull, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, probably the heart, or the wheel broken at the cistern. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Solomon's conclusion, our bodies are like a 2002 Honda CR-V. And like Elvin said, I mean, he writes this and it's kind of like he needs a hug and maybe a prescription. And I guess we've kind of discovered what the prescription maybe is, but maybe too far. And it's kind of ironic in verse 8, the preacher, Solomon, ends the sermon exactly how he began it, word for word. This is life wisdom from the wisest guy on earth, not named Jesus, who had it all. Verse 8, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. It's vapor. You can't grab it. You can't smell. You can smell it, but you just can't. It's just there, and then it's not. You thought it was going to be good, and then it just lets you down eventually. It's like vapor. And so his sermon ends. The book of Ecclesiastes goes on for a couple more verses where the author writes a couple things about the preacher. We won't cover that today, but before we close, I just want to make one critique of Solomon's sermon. And critique's probably not the right word. I mean, he was the wisest guy who walked the earth, not named Jesus, and so I'm not going to say he was wrong, but I mean, Solomon's words are brilliant. They are breathed out by God. They are timely. They are profound. But I think we got to take this sermon, this message from Solomon, in context of the whole message of the Bible. And if we're going to apply it correctly, we got to think, well, how does this fit with us? Because we've seen Jesus on the cross. Because Jesus changes everything. So Solomon was 100% correct, 100% wise, but I don't think he saw 100% of the picture. It's like he saw Empire Strikes Back, but he didn't get to see Return of the Jedi. It's like he was reading Pride and Prejudice, but the last few chapters were ripped out, and he never finds out that Darcy and, no, Darcy's the guy, isn't it? Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth, yeah. Never finds out that they get together. It's a bummer. It's like he knew how to solve quadratic equations by factoring, but then he comes to a trinomial that's prime and he can't factor it, and he doesn't know that there's a quadratic formula. I know, right? That's just rough. He kind of comes to some more dark conclusions because, I mean, he's right. Life is a dark, complicated thing. But what about Jesus? Is Jesus in Ecclesiastes? No. But kind of, I'd say. I like how one pastor put it. He said, Jesus is revealed in Ecclesiastes not by his presence, but by his absence. It's like we get Jesus, but not the portrait of Jesus. It's more like the silhouette of what could be there. And so the sermon title I have has a couple blanks in it because you got to read the book in context of the big book. And this is a flip sermon, so we finally get to the title, Life Without Jesus is vanity. And life with Jesus is eternal. In Ecclesiastes, it said, everything under the sun is vanity. Wisdom, vanity. Hard work, vanity. Pleasure, vanity. Wisdom, vanity. And that's all true. But after every downcast statement he makes, I just want to say, well, yeah, but what about Jesus? Yeah, but what about Jesus? And I was pondering how all of this fit. And I did something I never do. I wrote a poem. Not an equation, I wrote a poem. And it's in the form of a letter. And I'm writing it back to the preacher, Solomon. Because he comes to these conclusions and he's just frustrated, it seems like. There's no good answers. We can come to the same conclusions about life being vapor and tough, but we have hope in Jesus Christ. Let me read the letter to you. Just listen. Dear preacher, thank you for your wise words. They're what I needed. Life under the sun is bleak, confusing, and frustrating. You're absolutely right. Thanks for acknowledging that. But something cool happened since you passed. A man from your lineage came to earth and radically changed everything. His name's Jesus. He's God's son. Let me tell you a little bit about him and how he changes literally everything. For example, in chapter 1, you said life's a big cycle. There's nothing new under the sun. But actually, this Jesus says he's going to make all things new, including every person who believes in him. You also mentioned how wisdom is vanity. You're right. But later on, the Apostle Paul, P.S., you guys will get along great, says there's a special kind of wisdom found in Jesus Christ. And he wrote in 2 Timothy that the Holy Scriptures are able to make us wise for eternal salvation through faith in Christ Jesus. You said worldly pleasure is vanity in chapter 2. You're right. Jesus echoed that. You wrote that working hard is vanity, like in chapters 2 and 4. It does seem like that sometimes, doesn't it? You're right. But since Jesus came, we can work in light of eternity. Here's what I mean. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. In chapter 3, you said man has no advantage over the beasts because as one dies, so does the other. You're right. But believe it or not, Jesus was raised from the dead, and he promised that everybody that believes in him will be raised too. We actually have it better than the dogs. You were frustrated. You thought it was better to be dead than alive when you thought about the tears of the oppressed at the beginning of chapter 4. You're right, it's bad. But Jesus' life, death, and resurrection has opened up a place called heaven where every tear is going to be wiped and the mourners are actually going to rejoice. You said in chapter 4, verse 6, that one handful of rest is better than 2 fistfuls of labor and striving after wind. You're right. Thanks, I needed that. You found out from firsthand experience that wealth is vanity. You're right. But Jesus offered an alternative, to store up treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy. I was worried about you in the beginning of chapter 6. You said a stillborn child is better off than a person who has a bunch of stuff. Mainly because it's impossible to truly be content. You're right. But here's the weird thing. You can actually do everything through Jesus Christ. Especially the contentment thing. It's Philippians 4:13 through 17. Look it up. You noticed in 7 verse 15 that sometimes righteous people die too soon and wicked people live long lives. You're right. But this Jesus guy, you got to meet him, is so good. And heaven is so good that we can actually look forward to the day we die. Over and over again in your sermon, you said that life is chasing after wind. You're right. But after Jesus came the Holy Spirit. I'll have to write a different letter to explain. And with him, living life is like running with the wind. Sadly, at the end of chapter 9, you threw your hands up and said, just work hard because everybody's going to Sheol and nobody works there. You're right. But Jesus paved a new path. It's an eternal kingdom, and he's hiring. Then you gave us your conclusion again, that life is vanity because our bodies are like 2002 Honda ZR-Vs that end up in the junkyard. You're right. But you want to know something crazy? Jesus, you're starting to see how he changes everything. He promised that while our bodies are going to be done for, at the resurrection, we'll get new bodies. And word is they're like 2018 Ferraris. Preacher, your words are perfect. Your words are true. Your words are timely. You hammered home that life is vapor, and I shouldn't grasp for it. Your words pointed me to the realization that I'm really thirsty, and nothing under the sun will satisfy. You helped me realize that I needed to look above the sun. Actually, you helped me realize that I needed to look directly into the sun. S-O-N. Sending hugs and the prescription you requested. Yours truly, a concerned reader. New City, Jesus changes everything. See, 2,000 years ago, he changed everything. He rode in on a donkey, his face set to obey God and be brutally beaten and murdered and spit on, falsely accused, to do all that to save us from an eternal death and from a life of vanity. New City, will we take the words of the preacher to heart and apply the truths that we talked about earlier? That we'd shift our eyes from under the sun to above the sun? That we'd stop grasping for air and start holding on to something that will never leave us? Would we stop chasing the wind and start chasing Jesus? Without him, like the preacher says, it's all vanity.